have to talk about storm surge. It's the thing we worry most about here in the weather department when it comes to a landfalling hurricane. Storm surge is when the very low pressure from a hurricane and the strong winds, if on shore, can take the water from the Gulf of Mexico and push it onshore. And in the case of Ian, we face the potential for strong onshore winds for hours on end, which would push that water onshore, which would come close to a worst-case storm surge scenario for parts of Collier County, Lee County, even into Charlotte County. This is a European forecast model. 3 o'clock Wednesday, onshore winds start to kick in. That would bring that water onshore, and we'd be talking, again, some high storm surge scenarios here. Some of those worst-case storm surge scenarios could play out in that case. We have west of 41, a number of locations, Bonita Beach on northward, 6-foot-plus storm surge. That includes Lover's Key, inundated by 6-foot-plus storm surge. Just about all Fort Myers Beach as we work northward. A key here, too, the rivers. Where do the rivers go? Into the Gulf of Mexico. They're connected to that water, so the water flows up the river. The Estero River here showing that water going up, and this is going to be key for Cape Coral, for downtown Fort Myers. You take that water from the Gulf, you feed it up the mouth of the Caloosahatchee right on up the river. That water butts up against the southern end of Cape Coral. Now we're talking a 6 to 9 foot water rise on the extreme southwest end of the Cape, but really from Veterans on southward, this reasonable worst-case scenario calls for a 3-foot or so water rise. We face a significant storm surge threat from Hurricane Ian. I can't stress this enough. Southwest Florida, very prone to storm surge. We have very shallow water sitting offshore that are prone to be quickly pushed their way onshore in the wrong type of storm. What do I mean by the wrong type of storm? Storm surge doesn't just factor in the category or strength of the storm. Now, in this case, we're tracking a major hurricane heading towards us, but more important for storm surge is the size of the storm and the exact track it's taking in relation to the coastline that it's impacting. In our case, here in Southwest Florida, sort of the signal we've always looked for as to what would be sort of a high-end storm surge threat for us. It's a major hurricane making landfall to our north, in particular a large and slow-moving major hurricane making landfall to our north. Ian, more or less, checks all of those boxes. When you look at the cone of concern forecast, a Category 3 breaking down to a Category 2 as it moves onshore, but it will still be large. It will still have a wide wind radius as it moves its way to the north and east, making landfall, in all likelihood, just to the north of us in Southwest Florida. So that maximizes our storm surge threat. You have to remember, winds go counterclockwise around an area of low pressure in the northern hemisphere. So as Hurricane Ian moves northward and scrapes by our coastline, where are winds going to be as that center lifts north? Out of the south and west, pushing right onshore. We like to think of the shoreline as sort of a permanent fixture. It's not. It's there where it is usually because of gravity, but it doesn't take much to force that water inland. And winds like this, hurricane force winds along the coastline, are going to take that water and push it onshore. And not only that, push it up many of the different bays, waterways, harbors, streams. And that is what we're talking about when we say storm surge, the combination of low pressure and the winds around Ian taking the water and moving it onshore physically. I just want to sort of clarify why it is these evacuation orders are coming out. I know the focus leading up to hurricanes on the winds. It makes sense. That's that's how we rate hurricanes and everything like that. But the reason we have evacuation zones, the reason the evacuation orders are being put out is for the threat of storm surge. And he just said 4 to 7 feet of storm surge. That's especially true in Zone A. I think a 4-foot storm surge isn't out of the question, especially in that Zone B in Cape Coral. What you're talking about is 4 to 7 feet of water over the ground.
Right.
So if you choose to stay in those zones, that's what we're talking about in this scenario. Now, does it play out exactly that way? Time will tell as far as the cone goes. We always tell you, prepare for the worst, hope for the best. In the case, the worst here that we're talking about and why there's evacuations out now, 4 to 7 feet above water in those counties in your home.
So in other words, where your canal is right now, where the river is right now, 4 to 7 feet
Think of the normal water level, which in many cases is dry ground, and put 4 to 7 feet on top of that.
And also, too, for those of us that were here for Irma, I mean, the interesting thing with Irma was that it kind of made this dramatic shift to the east and kind of went up towards the center of the state. But with this storm, we're on what we call the sloppy side of the storm, which is on the east side of it.
This is a really good point, because many of these same areas were evacuated because of the storm surge threat leading up to Irma. We showed you very similar maps.
Yeah.
And for many of us in Lee County in particular, those surge numbers didn't quite play out. Right?
Not at all, actually.
This is a very different storm. We tell you all the time, every storm is different. And when we look at storm surge threat in Southwest Florida, what we look for is a slow-moving storm, a large storm making landfall to our north, which, Ian, check, check, check. So that's why those storm surge maps are showing that, 4 to 7 feet, as they said. Some numbers, worst case, come in even a little bit higher than that. This is a high-end storm surge threat for Southwest Florida. When you look through history, I don't see many examples that we can sort of draw on that I can give you the exact numbers that we had. But when we theoretically look at what would cause a significant storm surge in Southwest Florida, this is the exact storm we're talking about. So again, if you've been ordered to evacuate, if you're in that evacuation order, it's because of that storm surge threat. I'm showing you that worst case scenario map right there. These basically line up exactly with where Zone A is. In that red, that's above 9 feet of water. In parts of Cape Coral, we're talking 3 to 6 feet of water on that map. Fort Myers Beach, Sanibel, under 6 feet of water. Again, you can't leave wherever you are if you're there when 6 feet of water comes up. You can't be out on the roads. So if you have the opportunity to not be in those areas where storm surge comes up, you should do your best to do that, to get to higher ground. Find a friend, in downtown Fort Myers, Lehigh Acres. Go inland. The water is pushed up into Ostero Bay. Now we're talking 9 feet plus being put out by these models, all up and down Fort Myers Beach. Sanibel. There's the lighthouse on Sanibel. There's the western end of Estero Island. Times Square, right here. Imagine Times Square in Fort Myers Beach, under 9 feet of water plus. That's what this model is spinning out here.
Jim, Charlie, and Irma, but this storm completely different.
Yeah, and I get it. We've been through a number of hurricanes here in Southwest Florida. The two of the most recent, anyway, Charlie and Irma, two of the more impactful storms in the area. So I know many of you are likely saying, hey, I went through Charlie and X, Y, and Z happened during Charlie, so I'm not worried about that. Or I went through Irma and this didn't happen, so I'm not worried about that. Every hurricane, every storm is different. There'll be some similarities. Some spots will say, hey, Ian produced damage, sort of like what I saw in Charlie or like Irma, but every storm has a different story when all is said and done. Charlie, this is a radar imagery from when Charlie was making landfall. It moved on shore in around Cayo Costa as a 150-mile-per-hour Category 4 hurricane. So the winds a little bit higher than what we're talking right now with Ian. Only a little bit, unfortunately. But note, the width of the eye of Charlie was only 10 miles wide. This was a very small-scale extreme wind event. Some of us, including the Punta Gorda area, right on up through DeSoto County, got into that core of extreme winds, and the wind damage was extensive as a result. But compare that, 10 miles, the entirety of the eye, meaning the hurricane force winds only extending about 5 to 10 miles out from the center, to what we're seeing with Ian. The wind field, the hurricane wind field, is about 6 times that. So you have to be within 30 miles to get those winds, but it's going to be a much larger extent of those hurricane force winds, of those major hurricane force winds with Ian as it works its way onshore. Now, as I project this out, I take that wind field and I move it to the coast, making landfall, as the current track from that hurricane center shows, going into western Charlotte County, near the Inglewood area, near the Sarasota and Charlotte County line. The highest chance to get those major hurricane winds would be in the western end of Charlotte County, would be in the Lee County Islands here, south through Captiva. The high-end threat for winds would be a little bit lower then. For our inland areas, there would still be hurricane force winds extending deep inland, though, towards LaBelle and Immokalee, and that's why we are under a hurricane warning now for the entirety of the area. Something else I want to talk about. I've been watching the path closely, and there's no indication now that this is going to, say, take a path similar to what Irma did as it cut its way into Southwest Florida. In fact, as we just talked about a few moments ago, indications are there's more of a due north movement than the north and east at this point in time. So I think we can safely take out, at this point, any type of landfall into Collier County with this. No, in all likelihood, there's the forecast track, which goes up along the Sarasota and Charlotte County line. There's what Irma did. So I know many of you watching this morning likely were watching our coverage leading up to Hurricane Irma, which, just like we were talking about with Ian, was very focused on the threat for storm surge, especially in Lee and Collier counties. However, in the lead up to Irma, the thinking was the landfall would be here into the Lee County Islands. It came in off to the east, about 20 miles off to the east of that, into Marco Island, then of course cut right up 75, and that made all the difference in the world as far as the storm surge we saw from Irma. Ian is going to make landfall north of us. When we talk about the threat for storm surge in Southwest Florida, what we look for, a large, slow-moving, major hurricane making landfall along or north of the Sarasota and Charlotte County line, as that is how you get into the onshore winds, which forces that water onshore. When you look at the European forecast model, which shows an intensifying hurricane making landfall right around that location, there you go. By 3 o'clock, the entire stretch of our coastline seeing intense onshore winds, steady onshore winds, which is going to move that water onshore. Compiled with that, it's slow to move out, so we keep those onshore winds locked in right on into and through the evening, meaning the water will be pushed in and will be slow to escape, slow to start to wind its way down. So that's why we're focused so much on the storm surge threat, the high threat for storm surge across Southwest Florida. Stick around. Meteorologist Jason Dunning will be back with a breakdown, county by county, town by town, of what you can expect for storm surge in your location. This is from Diamond Head Resort to get your bearings. We're looking northward towards the pier, and you are starting to see the transition from high tide, from low tide rather, to high tide. Again, this is a big part of the reason too why we're so concerned with these high-end storm surge values, because right now, as the numbers are just starting to come up, we are in low tide. That is what low tide looks like on Fort Myers Beach today. And on Fort Myers Beach, you are just now starting to get a southerly component to the wind. You can sort of see, look at the trees. Look at the trees around the condos. They're working out of the south and east. So the wind is still working against the waters there on Fort Myers Beach, and yet we're already, because there's even a slight southerly component, seeing those water rises. You know, even on a normal day, when the tides are a little higher than normal, the water goes all the way up to the restaurants there in Times Square on Fort Myers Beach. So it is not going to take much to put Estero Island underwater. And I believe I just saw a person walking there on the beach right now, which I would hope that that person or anybody on Fort Myers Beach, as we head through the next couple of hours here and these waters begin to climb, if you've decided to ride it out on Fort Myers Beach, you see those condos there? Get to the upper floors. The condos are built, notice, they have sort of some built-in space for storm surge to rise. Because as we build here and develop in Southwest Florida, we all know the threat for storm surge. We're all told what the threat is for storm surge, and that threat is coming to bear here today as Ian moves its way in. I want to show you this, and you can go ahead and bring it back to me here at the pod. This is from Naples. I've been watching this closely, and every time this refreshes, we get a higher water level. We're at 5 feet now. This is by the pier in Naples. We're at 5 feet now. We're supposed to be at low tide. This is high tide at 3 feet. We are already about 2 feet higher now than our normal high tide at low tide. And the winds have just started to turn out of the south and west in the Naples area. So we already have a 5-foot water rise in Naples, and we're only now heading into high tide, and we're only now starting to get the onshore winds. The storm surge is starting now in Collier County. It is only going to work its way up the coast as Ian lifts its way northward. So again, we're just starting to see the surge. We already have the winds starting to press their way into parts of Southwest Florida. Lee County Islands, if you're not there yet, Sanibel, Captiva, if you've chosen for whatever reason to ride out the storm on Sanibel and Captiva, I want you to get to your safe space now. I want you to stay there through the duration of the storm as these winds come up.